Hello, my name is Chris Wright. Today I'll be talking about Geocortex Workflow 5, the next generation of workflow technology, and it is the first in a new suite of applications that are being created by Latitude Geographics. I have a few slides to show you and then we'll do a live demonstration. For a number of years now, Latitude Geographics have been selling the Geocortex Essentials product suite. This product suite enables users to extend the ArcGIS server technology with purposeful built applications that are easy to configure and easy to deploy. Pre-built capabilities for creating print templates, chart templates, report templates are all available inside the application. You also have an HTML5 viewer which allows you to use your data simultaneously on desktop, on tablet and on mobile devices. But perhaps the most important and the most powerful part of this product is the workflow technology. The workflow technology allows you to configure purposeful business processes in a simple, easy to use way. You have forms that allow you to configure input from the user simply and easily with drop-down menus, autocomplete forms, and it drives the user through a business process. So with this in mind, why build a new workflow? Why come out with Workflow 5? Well, the existing workflow technology is built on Windows Workflow Foundation and does not allow offline capabilities. More and more organisations require the ability to use applications in a truly offline mode these days. With the introduction of Esri's new JavaScript 4 API, a new approach is required to application development, but a new architecture brings new opportunities. Problems that were once seen as difficult or impossible can now be realised and can be done within Workflow 5. You can build workflows that really do work in an offline mode. Geocortex Workflow 5 is the first standalone application in the new Geocortex 5 series. It's a new breed of applications. Workflow 5 is significantly different to the traditional workflow that we all know. Firstly, Workflow 5 is built on JavaScript, not .NET. So why JavaScript? It's probably best to quote Atwood's law, which states any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. For those of you who don't know, Jeff Atwood is an American software developer, author, blogger and entrepreneur. Workflow 5 has a new web-based designer. There is no need to install an application on your desktop in order to build workflows. You can just use your browser to do this. The workflows themselves, they run in the browser instead of the server, so they are client-side. This means that workflows can work truly offline in the Geocortex mobile app framework. This really opens up a new world, such as dynamic offline validation of data in the field. You can design workflows that can be used in the HTML5 viewer, they can be used in Web App Builder or even ArcGIS Pro. All applications use the same workflow, so you build once and reuse them in the different applications. Workflow 5 is independent. Because of its design, there are no ties to any other Geocortex underlying software. Initially, Workflow 5 is offered as a software as a service product, which means it's maintenance-free, worry-free and hassle-free. You just log into it and use it. In order to log in, you need to have an ArcGIS identity to save and share these workflows. You can have an online, a portal or even a Geocortex identity. Existing Geocortex Essentials users who are on active maintenance are entitled to Geocortex Workflow 5 within your organisation. Please talk to One Spatial to allow us to register you for you to be able to use Workflow 5. There's also a free developer edition. Anybody can use Workflow 5. You can just log in and use it. Obviously, if you then want to use your workflows in a production environment, you need to purchase a copy of Workflow 5. So that's the end of the presentation, so let's have a look at the software in action. For the purposes of the webinar, I'm going to create the well-known Hello World workflow. In order to do this, I must first log into my Workflow 5 designer. When I log into the designer, you can see that I've got a number of activities down the left hand side from which I can choose from to start building my application. There is also a series of sample workflows. So if I click on New, you can see here there's a set of samples that users can use to get a basis for their new workflow that they wish to build. So if I wanted to create a display form with some items in it, I might pick this sample. But I'm going to create my workflow from scratch. So here I've got my activities. So what I need to do for my Hello World is to add in a display form to my workflow here. And you can see I've got this display form, and then I can go into the display form by double clicking on it. And the first thing I can do is to change the form title to be Hello World. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text box, and you'll notice here that because I'm in a display form, only the activities that are available for the display form are presented to me in my toolbox. So I'm going to add in a text box to the form, and I can just drop the text box in here, and I can set the title of the text box to type in some text. Then what I need to do obviously is I need to echo what the user types in. So in order to do this, I can have an alert activity in my workflow. I can add the alert activity in, and then I need to tell it where to get the information from to alert on the screen. And because this is JavaScript, we're using TrueScript here, and I can start typing with using the equals, and then it'll show me that I've got form 1 here, which is my display form. So I can double click on that, and then I can click dot, and that allows me to get to parts of the form. So I can check the state of the form, and then I can check the text box 1, and I can check the value of text box 1. So I'm going to alert the value of text box 1 in form 1. And there I've created my first workflow. So I can save this workflow away. So I can do File, Save As, and give the workflow a name. So I'll call it UK Webinar. I save that, and it gets saved to my ArcGIS Online account. What we have available to us within this new workflow is the ability to test our workflows in a sandpit environment. So if I click on the info button here, you can see I've got Run in Sandbox. If I click Run in Sandbox, what you'll see is that I get 3 windows available to me. On the left hand side is a window that's running the JavaScript 3.2 API. On the left hand side I have a window running the JavaScript 3 API. In the middle I have a window running JavaScript 4 in 2D, and on the right I have a window running JavaScript 4 in 3D. So if I, on the left hand side here in my JavaScript 3 window, if I just hit the play button, it's going to run my workflow. So it will pop up a form for us to type some text into. So if I type in some text and I hit submit, we can see that the text gets echoed here. I can also run the workflow in the JavaScript 4 3D environment, and you'll see that the workflow works in the same way. This allows users to make sure that the workflows they create will work in all the current and new environments. So what I'll do now is change the workflow a little bit. So if I go back to my display form, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text button and change this into a send me an email workflow. So I go to my toolbox here, and I'm going to add in a checkbox above the box to type in some text, and I'm going to change the label on the checkbox to be please send me an email. And then what I'm going to do, the text box, I'm going to change the title of the text box to say, please enter an email address. As it stands, this form isn't very interactive at the moment. The buttons and the boxes work independently of each other. It would be really nice if the toggle button is off, then this text box isn't showing. If it's toggled on, then the text box shows. So let's do that then. So the first thing I need to do is I need to make the text box invisible by toggling the visible button there. And then if I go back to my checkbox, I can add an event to the checkbox. Then if I go to my checkbox, I can add an event to the checkbox. What I want to do is I want to check the state of the button in that checkbox. So what I'm going to say is have a look at the form, at the state of checkbox 1, and check if it's checked. If it is, then I want to make checkbox. If it is, then I want to make text box 1 visible. And I can do that with the show form element. So I can say, if the box is checked, then show checkbox 1. If the box is checked, then show text box 1. If the checkbox is not checked, then I want to hide that element. So I'm going to save that workflow at this point. And you can now see that I've got a display form and I've added an event to that checkbox. So what I want to do now is I want to add this to my HTML5 viewer. In order to do that, I need to share the workflow to everybody in my group. So I can click on View here and it opens my ArcGIS Online account. And I can click the Share button for the workflow and I can say share it with everybody. The workflow is now shared, so I can now use it in my HTML5 viewer. So if I go to my manager here and I open up my general test site, I can go to my viewers and I can edit the HTML5 viewer. I can then go to my toolbar because I want to add a button to the toolbar, and I'm going to add it to this tools section. I'm going to add a button and I'm going to call the button GW5, and the tooltip is run a new workflow 5. I can add an icon to this, and then the command parameter I use is similar to what we do for workflow 4, but instead of running a workflow by ID, we run a workflow by URL, and then we need to pass in that URL, and we can get the URL from Workflow 5 Designer. So the URL is here, so I can copy to the clipboard and then I can paste the URL into my button parameter there, and I can click on OK and I can apply my changes to the buttons. What I also need to do at this point is I need to enable Workflow 5 for this viewer. can then save my site. I can then launch my viewer in a browser. When I launch the viewer in a browser, you can see I've got a GW5 button here. I can click on this button and I can click on please send me an email, and then I can enter an email address. And I can click on submit and I get alerted the email address. Now interestingly, what we can also do is we can also run this workflow in ArcGIS Web App Builder. So if I go here to my Firefox and I open up Web App Builder, I've got a Workflow 5 test site. I can edit this site. I can go to the widgets. I can go to widget number 1 and I can add in a workflow in either modal or non-modal form. So I'm going to add in a non-modal form. So I click on OK here. Then what I need to do is I need to choose the workflow. So I need to go to my ArcGIS Online account and then I can search for the workflow. So I've got UK Webinar. I can click on OK. I can click on OK. I now have the workflow in my Web App Builder. I can save that app and I can launch the app. I can click on the button and I get the same form presented to me. Please send me an email. Enter my email address. And then I can echo that to the screen. So that's how you can then use the same workflow inside Esri's Web App Builder. Okay, so let's go back to my Workflow Designer and I'll show you some more things that you can do with the new workflow. So if I go into my form again, what I might want to do is to change the look and feel of the form. So most of these form items have markdown text on them. So for example, where it says please send me an email, if I put double underscore either side of that, the email now becomes bold, the word email. In my text box here, if I put a single underscore either side of email, it'll get shown in italics. So there's the word email in italics. So I can save that and I can have a look at that in a moment. We can also internationalize the forms as we go along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this Hello World title here a link so that I can add in some translations. So I'm going to call this at Form 1 title. So I've just put in a link there that allows me to then link back to it from our translations page. And then here on my info tab I've got a translations page, and in my existing default locale I can add in that Form 1 title, and what I'm going to say is that Hello World. If I now go back to my toolbox, what we'll see is that now says Hello World. More importantly, what we can do is I can now add a new translation in a different language. Let's say the Dutch language. So if I find NL here, I can add in the Dutch language. It already knows I've got a Form 1 title. So then I can add in the Dutch for Hello World. And then if I go back to my toolbox, we can now see that this is in Hello World. Now, if I go back to my toolbar here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of items to my URL here. I'm going to say and dev equals true. This allows me to compile the workflow on the fly. And then I'm going to say and locale equals NL. And this runs the browser in the Dutch locale. So I'll just refresh my browser here. and I'll run my workflow 5. You can see that it currently says hello world, which is incorrect. And I'll save my form here. Having saved my form, I can go back to my toolbar, and what I can do is I can add the words having saved my workflow, I can go back to my HTML5 toolbar and I can add the terms and dev equal true and locale equal NL. This then runs the workflow dynamically, compiles it dynamically, and also runs it with the, and there you can see it's in Dutch. Last go. I can save my workflow. I can go to my HTML5 toolbar here, and on the URL I can add the words and dev equal true and locale equal NL. Now this allows me to compile the workflows on the fly without the need of refreshing the viewer each time, and then runs the viewer with the Dutch locale. So I'll run the viewer again. This time when I hit the button here, the run the workflow 5, you can see that it's in Dutch translation here, and you can see the bold email, and then you can see email in italics here. And then adding my email address alerts it on the screen here. So one of the other things that you can do with Workflow 5 is you can call existing Workflow 4 workflows. So you might want to do some server-side activities, for example, using a Workflow 4. So what I've got here is a very simple Workflow 4. All it does is got one input argument and one output argument, and it takes the input argument and puts stars either side of it and passes that back out again. So in order to run that workflow, what I can do is I can add in a Run Essentials workflow activity to my workflow. And I'll just connect that in and connect it out again. So what I need to do is, in order to run the Essentials workflow, I need the URL for that workflow. In order to do that, I need to go back to my site, and in my manager I need to go to workflows. I've loaded the workflow inside my site, and then I need the REST endpoint for the workflow. I can copy this and I can paste it into the URL for the workflow. And then I need to pass in an argument to the workflow, and we know that that argument is called input1. And input1 is going to be form1.textbox1.value. So I'm going to pass in the email address that gets typed in to the workflow. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show what the output of that workflow is. So I need to change this to be essentials workflow 1 dot result dot output 1, because we know that's what's coming out of our essentials workflow 4. So I save the workflow here. I go back to my toolbar and I rerun my workflow by clicking on the icon, and you can see that the language is now Dutch, so I get hello world. You can also see that email is in bold, and if I hit the toggle button, the email address here is in italics. If I enter the email address and hit submit, we'll call the workflow 4 workflow, process the input, pass it out as an output, and you can see that I get my email address with 3 stars either side of it. That concludes my webinar. If you'd like to get in contact with us, please email geocortex@onespatial.com or email me direct on chris.wright@onespatial.com. Thank you for your time today.